Welcome to In the Pursuit of Journey to Self, a podcast that seeks to explore the taboo topics around themes such as identity, love, beauty, religion, and fulfillment. Through this exploration, we hope to embark on a journey of self-discovery and a celebration of the diversity that makes up our society. Join us for our bi-weekly discussions as we discuss our perspectives on Blackness. This podcast is In the Pursuit of Journey to Self. Come join us and let us learn together. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our podcast, In the Pursuit of. Today we have joining us the Mars Playhouse team for our introductory podcast and to give you our perspectives on our first season's theme of Blackness. So thank you all for joining us. We have with us today Diana, Kitri, Shanita, and Mahalia. Each of them shortly will introduce themselves, give you a little bit about who they are and where they're from. And this season's podcast really surrounds the idea of Blackness and all that entails, especially with the current climate as it is. We found that it is a very important theme and a very important topic to explore, not just nationally, but globally. We want to take a look at how is Blackness perceived? How do different people of color throughout the world experience Blackness? What is their journey, and what are the differences and similarities that exist? And toward that end, we have our team here to explore those ideas and to dive right in and to sort of just start hashing things out or just sharing their own opinions of how they walk through the world. We really wanted to do a podcast like this because we really feel that there is a need for us to dialogue. There is a need for us to talk to each other, even within our own spheres, about how we engage the world. We are not a monolith. We are all different culturally, geographically, and there are many similarities, but there are also many differences. And I think it's in order to really have a diverse, or to say that, we are a diverse people, we need to really explore that in further depth. I'm Antonavia Ochocoltes. I'm the CEO founder of Mars Playhouse. And one of our missions is really to increase the lexicon for Black plays and films of Caribbean and Caribbean American diaspora throughout the globe. And so this topic, especially this season, is very close to our hearts. So thank you for joining us. So first up, I'll ask Diana to introduce herself, where she's from, and we'll follow in that way before we start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Nosa. I am a Nigerian American, born and raised in Newark, New Jersey. And a little bit about myself. I am a writer / filmmaker. I am on the Moss Playhouse team as a social media marketer / research and partnerships intern. And I am also in charge or spearheading the podcast that you are listening to right now. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kitri. I'm French from Guadeloupe, the French West Indies. And I'm part of the digital marketing and social media team as an intern. And I'm really happy to share with everyone.
Hello all, my name is Shanita Rafnayaka. I am from the US, but have spent a great deal of my adult life in Asia. So that's led to a number of very interesting experiences in light of this topic. And I'm both a freelance artist and a freelance brand manager. And pleasure to be here.
And finally, we have joining us Mahalia.
Hello, everybody. I'm a Haitian American, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm a research and partnership intern here at Moss Playhouse. And I am also very excited to have this discussion with you guys.
Thank you all. I feel so fortunate to have you all on today, and I'm looking forward to exploring these questions together. So, the first general question for the group is what does blackness mean to you? What does this idea, what does that mean when, like, even when thinking about what does that word, when you think of it, what comes to mind when you think of blackness?
Okay, so when I hear the word blackness, I think about history and legacy because this is who I am. So I know my story and I know that it's a long journey for black people. So yeah, the first word that came in my mind was history.
Um, like the others, history definitely comes to mind. And I feel like as I travel more and as I get older, that the term black or the idea of blackness is just an oversimplification of a number of different tribes and people and ethnicities with very distinct journeys that may have some similarities but have very different stories to tell. So I am definitely in the process of understanding the world in a new way, rather than up until this point. I feel like I have the idea of blackness has been defined for me by the people who own former colonies and by what I've been taught in school, whereas I'm now exploring history on my own, exploring cultures on my own. So it's something that is definitely unfolding and developing in a new way for me. So to actually answer that very easily is a difficult thing now, so more than ever. But it's a beautiful journey, I think, to discovering more people, more cultures, and the beauty and diversity of a very diverse group.
So when I think of blackness, I think in a one word answer, it would just be experience. It's something about it's a lived culture that can only be explained by just saying that you have gone through this phenomenon that we all are who share the same skin or just same history have can explain only by just experience. There's no other ways to explain it. It's just as vague and as abstract as can be. It's a way of life that differs for everybody, but it somehow ties us all together in just one word, and I guess that's blackness. But
And it's funny, as you're talking, it makes me wonder, like, who gets to be included and who's excluded from this term, right? Like, how do you gain admission? And is it something that was meant to sort of marginalize? Or is it something that was simply just meant to distinguish one from another? And how are you on one side or the other? Like, what determines that? Like, you think back to who set the rules up for that and why we're still following them so many years later. You also mentioned history and mentioning that we have a shared history. And I would agree with you insofar. I think we definitely have a shared trauma. And as a result of that trauma, I think many of us across the globe, we now have a fractured history. So, how that history has developed since that trauma really has caused extensive fractioning, and but it also has caused a lot of varied cultural growth and nuances, and has created so much more diversity even within the original diversity that was the African continent. So yeah, it's really interesting when you think of the word history as a collective for Black people. All right. So tell me, do you believe that race or ethnicity is something that could be accurately defined? Like, is that something where we're spot on? The encyclopedia says it. This is what we know to be true. How do you in your own daily lives separate the idea of race and ethnicity, and do you even think about it? How does it affect your life on a whole?
As for me, I I don't think race and ethnicity can be defined. I think it's something that really does change with each generation. Like I think when it was created, as a form of identification rather than identity, people, would be it was easier to check one box, or because we had to just check one box. But as our generation continue to, prove that you don't just have to be one thing, you can identify as many things as you want to. People start to check more than one box, and it's starting to become really, the lines starting to become blurred in terms of like, okay, so are you Black American or are you Jewish? And then people are like, why do I have to choose? Why can't I be both? And so their race could be, I don't know if I'm saying this politically correctly, but like Black and Jew, or it could just be, it doesn't have to be just one thing. For me personally, I understand that even though I'm like pretty much 99% Nigerian, like I never encounter race that much at all in terms of like not knowing where do I define myself, because I just know 99%. But as far as the whole world, basically, that 1% for me could be German. And if I decide to identify as German one day, no one can really tell me I can't. So I think as time progressed and as people start to realize like we can be more than one thing. We don't have to just be one race, one ethnicity. People start to identify as many, many things. And I think it's a positive that it can't be defined. Like race and ethnicity just simply cannot be defined.
Well, it's so you said so many things there. I just started writing. Just started writing it down. One of the things that you said that really stuck out with me is identification, not identity.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Identification, not identity. And that's so true because now what was once used to identify you has now become your identity. You've now been
Right.
branded with this. And now that you also spoke about checking more than one box and the lines being blurred. And it's so important that that happens because it feels like the more we're able to put each other in just singular boxes, then the more division that creates in and of itself. But there's definitely a reason I feel like that came about, especially with like we're talking about checking more than one box now. And you can tell me, how you all feel about this, but there was a time that if you were like 2%, 5% black, you don't want to check that box because it endangered your life, because it lowered your standing in the view of the world, in the eyes of the world. So, uh, saying that you had any percentage of you really put you at risk for harm and definitely for being marginalized within the society as a whole. But now it seems that things are changing, however slowly, in that area. Yeah, so things are changing, and so we are able to start checking those other boxes, or are we? Does it depend on where you are geographically? What do
I
you all
think you
think?
sorry, just to interject here. You really bring up an important point. Back then, it was dangerous. Like was it the 1/8 rule back then? I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
yeah.
Yeah, even if you're just a little drop of black, you were identified as black, and you'll be persecuted as black, treated as black. And of course, now that it's okay, hallelujah, to be black, like now people are fine to check it, even if they have 0.001% black. Some people claim that. But unfortunately, in some places, I know that some places like are still going through the aftermath of genocide. So, granted, America was able to quote unquote escape it. There's some countries that are still currently going through genocide. So, if you do identify, for example, as a certain race or ethnicity, people will target you. So, I think it really does depend on geographic location, like you said.
Well, for me, I believe they can be accurately defined just because whoever created them can accurately define them based on whatever definition they created. I always I come from an anthropological background, so when I look at humanity, at the beginning of humanity, we didn't use those terms to define ourselves. It was tribal, it was nationality, and with time, someone came in and decided to superimpose these new terms such as race and ethnicity, which murkied things. They were new. Along with that came colonialism and lines being drawn that began to redefine all of those things that we previously knew. So I say all of that to say it can be. Do I adhere to them? No.
Yeah. And you mentioned tribal, that there was more of a duality of like tribalism and nationality. Like you were either in this tribe or you belong to this nation. And the first calls to mind community. When you think of tribes, you think of community. When you think of nationality, you think of country. And so that seems more specifically, lines that you can get behind in terms of grouping, putting groups of people together. As you said, nationality, it rang a bell for me because just I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and that is really how we have always defined ourselves. It has always been nationality first, uh, race far second. Now things are also changing in that respect. I must say, as the world sort of homogenizes and we sort of learn good and bad habits from the world. But centrally for us growing up, it really was about I'm Trinidadian, and not until I came to America did I have to like further define who I was and further dissect who I was. And that was sort of fracturing in its own way, because it's like, how much of you is this? How much of you is that? Do you get to claim it? Do you get to claim all of who you are? And so it's interesting that you said that this is where it started, and how far we've moved away from that.
I would have to agree with that. Even though I am, I would say, I guess, first generation, and my family, according to them, they don't consider me a full on Haitian because I don't like my accent is not the clearest, I guess, or when I speak Creole, it's not the best. But when I'm around my family and everybody in the community, it's interesting to see how they are often trying to keep the the ideals of their culture alive, because as if it's like some sort of badge of honor, if that makes sense. And I'm often seeing like where there's a little bit of a confusion happening, because if we are looking at how we're defined in history books, technically speaking, we're considered an Afro Latino country, but we don't seem to recognize it as much. We are French speaking, Haitian speaking, Creole speaking. I don't know why. We are, you know, the thing is,
That's a conversation all its own.
it's a whole conversation all its own.
Mhm.
And what is interesting about it is just that when we, in some ways, sometimes the language that you speak, especially in Haiti, that would sometimes define even sometimes a class, a certain sense of classism. And you see that also reflected here. Of course, in Haiti, it's different. It's not as divided as it is here. But when you come to the U.S. and when I talk to other people, I often see people who will like before they say they're Haitian, they will say I'm an Afro Latino, because that means that you at this point have identified as being less African or less black or anything of the sort. And it's strange to me because it's like there are all these different definitions as to how to differentiate yourself from being just black, I guess, just straight on black. But there is so many different ways to I don't know, to acknowledge it as well, but people tend to go away from it. And it it's a strange thing because before, like Shanita said, it was tribes and it was other, like, your culture and all these things, but now it's like, are you how black are you? Are you black enough? Or, how much black is there in you? And all it's just what the percentage is and all these things. And it's just so much it's so much confusion, but it's a good thing though, because there should be a little bit of differentiation between people sometimes, because we don't want to be too homogenized as well. But there's also a little bit of confusion happening as well, and I think that can be a little stressful.
Well, it's so funny. You mentioned Afro Latino and just having all of these different ways to qualify your blackness, and that sort of brings you back to the question that we spoke about before. What does blackness mean to you? the Latino has to qualify that I'm not all the way black. And it feels that it like, even just in how we have to say, well, I do have like 7%, Irish, or I am 19% Polish, that we are running from the idea of blackness. We, as, different sectors within society, because you've sort of been told for a long while that black is not good. So if you've been put in that category, it's sort of been a marginalizing effect. So the only way out of it is to latch on to the parts of you that can sort of free you from this fate of being black. Um, and you've seen that more recently. There's sort of been a backlash in that, insofar as the black community, those of who are proudly black in their skin now, are sort of fighting back and saying, if you have 7% black in you, these are random numbers, that you are black, you don't get to claim anybody else, you don't get to reach outside of your race, you don't get to deny us, because that's what it's been seen as. It's been seen as a denial of the race to want to claim any part of any other race. And that really comes from our history as well, in needing to get out, because we thought it was harm, it was lower status, it was an entirely different life if you claimed any part of the world of of blackness, of being black.
Right. Yeah. If I could just interject for a moment, it's funny that you say that, just because someone who can identify as African American, which I can, and also as Latina, um, I traveling abroad and coming back to America, or listening to yeah, any sort of program that dealt with that issue, particularly of people who have any percentage of black blood, you have to identify as this. I feel like that's a very American,
Yes.
very just yeah, a very American take on things. That, and it's it's strange to kind of say, but in a sense, I feel like it still carries that colonial spirit,
Yes.
because you now feel the need to tell someone else how they must define. So you're trying to hijack, take over, colonize their identity and their freedom to identify as they please. So I understand where they're coming from and wanting people to be comfortable with who they are, and that's the beautiful side of it. Just really allowing yourself to identify with the beautiful aspects of our culture, and shying away from how others have defined Black cultures, particularly African American cultures in this sense, in this case. But being aware that your need to want to hijack someone else's um, freedom to
Yeah.
identify is a colonial spirit in and of itself. So.
It definitely is. And I love to be devil's advocate for a moment, because I definitely agree with you. But as you mentioned, in terms of, a person's freedom to identify as who they are, it almost, so I would say that their comfort is oppressive to the African, like, let's to those, the African Americans who feel like it's an all or none situation. It can be oppressive because it's like, you need to identify with your black side, because then you are shunning me. It's almost like a personal affront, right? This is how I have perceived this as a non-African American, living here for quite some time. I could be wrong, and that's why we have this program to just really keep digging in. But I am now trying to really try to get inside, to really understand the perspective of the African American person who believes that, uh, if you cannot deny your blackness, and you cannot claim anything else. So just a devil's advocate in that way.
I mean, but it's also again not just the colonial spirit, but it's a very American take on things. just to demand that someone else define things in the way that you do.
Yeah.
You're taking away their freedom in essence.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
you haven't walked in their shoes. And for me, for example, to identify also as Latina, I'm actually embracing that because for Puerto Rico, for example, it's well known that we have roots that come through there. So that's not a denial of it. Actually, it's a further, it's just encompassing the other journey that happened to have that didn't land on American soil but came through a Caribbean island, for example. Yeah. And just giving people the freedom to explore, I think, would eventually allow them to come to a place of comfort and eventually embrace that blackness, quote unquote, even more, just by letting them have that journey on their own.
Right. So. By realizing that blackness there is diversity in what that word means.
Exactly.
I would have to agree with both of you. I honestly believe that there is beauty in being able to essentially identify who you are and where you come from and what you know what you view as yourself. If you are Afro Latino, then and you come from a place that celebrates both, then you definitely should identify with that. I want to say as devil's advocate that I think, and I do agree that it is an American thing also to try to force perspective or push your opinion onto another person just to kind of fit a box, because we like to compartmentalize in America, and and it seems like putting things in boxes makes things much easier for everybody, and being easy and lazy, I guess, unfortunately, can be an American thing sometimes. But to be devil's advocate, I think sometimes what I'm noticing also is the intent, is where the question lies. It's if you are distinguishing where your lineage is, if, like, for example, you make it a note to say that you have 7% Irish in you or something of that nature, is the intent behind it? Are you saying it because you are truly proud of it and you just are expressing that as part of who you are? Or are you saying it because you are trying to distinguish yourself as, I don't know, more than just, I guess, Black? And I don't know if it's a bad thing or not for either one, because I think, I mean, for just expressing your culture and your identity is never a bad thing. I think when somebody is trying to express some sort of differentiation for the sake of just removing themselves from a marginalized group, I mean, it's more so sad than it is to be demonized. It's more so of a sad thing, because it's like it just goes to show another part of our culture that just is being pushed down again. And I think that when people are often calling it out, I think they're calling out the parts of people who have not recognized that yet. And I think they're just trying to get people to pay attention to it and just kind of, hey, just so you are doing this because of such and such reason, not because, you honestly believe that. You know what I mean? Like you called it out for a reason. Nobody asked, And sometimes that's the case. And other times it's just that person is just, that's who they are. Like, and there's no need to shun them or, try to shove them down and just be like, you are Black, and just say that right now. Right. Like that's not a necessity. But yeah.
Yeah, I can relate on what Shanida said about, like, in the US, you have to identify yourself like almost every time, because when I moved to New York, that was the first time they asked me, okay, what's your ethnicity? So I was like, okay, why are they asking me that? That was really the first time. I was 24 years old, and I lived in different country, and that was the first one asking me that. And the choice was limited. So I was like, I don't know. I put others, but what is others? So yeah, that was pretty confusing for me. And I asked myself, why they ask that? What was the point? And yeah, as a Caribbean, I guess it's more and more harder to define who we really are as a race and an ethnicity, because we are a lot of different ethnicity. For example, in Guadeloupe, we have European, we have Indian, we have Latin Americans. We can also have people, so we can be four of them. And so, yeah, I believe in my hand that it's really hard to define ethnicity today. And on my daily life, it's occur when someone asks me. But if anyone asking me what my ethnicity or my race, that's just okay. We just have normal conversation. But I think it's really okay when I ask the question, when someone say, "Oh, you have an accent. Where do you come from? Which region of Africa I come from?" Because I think it's all of them. So,
Yeah. That
so
that is so true. I mean, we share that in common, because when I first came to America and they asked that question, I too was looking at the other box. I'm like, what would I'm looking at the other box. I'm Caribbean. I don't see that box. I don't see that box. Where is it? And it's because you said no one has actually asked you prior to that moment to dissect who you are, and coming from a place where it's nationality first, and there is so much mixing within the country, that was not a theme that you grew up having to address and wear on your sleeve. And so it really did create a little bit of an existential moment. Like, who am I? I almost felt like, wait, I need to research this? Like, who really am I? But then I realized that being here, I didn't really get a choice. Just check the box, check the box. Um,
yeah,
and
and even if complicated for me, I mean, from Guadeloupe, because in the US, no one, like most of people, does not know about Guadeloupe. So when I say, okay, I'm Caribbean from Guadeloupe, they say, what, where is Guadeloupe first? And then I say, okay, it's the French colonized island and all of that, but they don't know the history. So they're asking me, okay, but what's your origin in Africa? And then the conversation, uh, it's a bit complicated. So when I'm not in France, I'm just say I'm French. That's just easier for me to identify myself as a French. Yeah, to avoid those kind of question. But yeah, usually I first identify myself as Caribbean and as a Guadeloupean girl.
I was just gonna say it's interesting because you're being asked for to identify your African roots by people who likely don't know theirs. So it's just it still goes back to who has set up these standards, these definitions for us, and just taking a moment to challenge that, and not force everyone to just um, adjust to what your current understanding of those terms
yeah,
mean.
yeah. I'd like to add that, like, just thinking about it, it's bringing back a little bit of PTSD, because for me, like growing up in the Caribbean, my I can't go very far back on my in my what is it, my family tree. And because there's been so much migration, there's been so much as a result of this initial trauma. No one's record keeping, no one's no one's really doing the work to make sure that we remember who we are in 5 years. And so for me, I have a very short family tree. So when you ask me that as a sort of like casual way, like they ask in these spaces, whether it's the airport, whether you're going for, it's 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 not offensive, but it's injuring, because it reminds you of the trauma. It's like I have to have like the closest narrative available for them, because the truth is, as Kitri said, is so much more complicated and incomplete. And so, but what they do at the drop, what is done at the drop of a hat when you bring up, like, who you are, what are you, is they want an answer that puts you in a specific box. And it's not specific, and it's not simple. And I wish we would stop pretending that it is, to that effect. So if we are agreeing, and this is a tricky one, if we're agreeing that race and identity or identification was really a construct that was created, do you believe that Black individuals can denounce their Blackness? And vice versa, as we have, Rachel Dolezal and others who have become infamous for it. Do you believe that non-Black people can pronounce their Blackness? And that brings us back to the whole idea of what is Blackness, right? What do we define it as? Who gets to define it, and who gets to break out of those roles or break into them?
I feel like people who want to pronounce their blackness, I think they can denounce the Black experience, but they can't denounce the Black blood that runs through their veins. Like if we're talking about in terms of genealogy, yes, you're Black. Like there's no way you can just erase that. But if they're talking about the Black experience, it's just like in our society. Like if you want to identify, you can. If you don't want to identify, the freedom to identify is just as valid as the freedom to not identify. So if someone decides one day, like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't really relate to the Black experience, whether it's because of childhood trauma of, being called too dark skin or what have you, or whether it's because it just straight up just, you know, unfortunately like self-hate, or maybe it's not even that deprecating. It could just be simply because they just don't identify. They do have the freedom to do so. But in terms of the other way around, if someone just, I think, I feel like if I say it one way, I have to play it another way as well. That you can have some parts where you relate to the Black experience, but in your blood, you can't just pronounce that you're Black. Like it doesn't just pop up and be like, okay, well, that 0.0000001%, that I want to identify as that. I mean, if you want to, if it's in your blood, okay, but I don't think that if someone who doesn't have any type of Blackness inside of them at all, like none, no ancestors at all, like you have to go all the way back to Adam and Eve, then no, I don't think that it should be. I don't think
I
that's
think
fair.
I think Adam was like 2% Black.
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
the records were since burned, but I believe he might have
right,
been.
right. But yeah, I definitely think that it's a two-way street, but not really. If that makes sense. If that makes sense.
A question came up as you were responding. So you said that they should be able to, but if you are perceived as Black by the society, are you actually able to denounce your Blackness? Because it would seem to me you can denounce it in your own mind, but
Right. Mm-hmm.
nobody else is helping you on that train. If you look
Mm-hmm.
Black, then you don't get to make decisions about opting in or
Right.
opting out.
That's what I mean as well. Because yes, you can denounce it, you can do it, but as far as everyone else, like everyone's gonna call you what they see you as, and
Right.
that's just like if I stroll up one day, like, you know what, I'm not a part of the Nigerian culture anymore. Like it doesn't matter. My mom's still gonna call me by my Nigerian name. My aunt is probably gonna call me my grandmother, my father. Like it doesn't matter. So I think people who denounce it have to also understand that while their point is valid, that other people's point is valid too. You don't just get to hop on the Black experience when you want to and then hop off when it's no longer serving you, if that's the case.
Well, it's so funny. That's exactly what's happening right now, though. Like the hopping on, I think we're having a Black moment where it's. I don't want to use the word popular, but it feels like it's sort of in right now to identify with the idea of being Black and the struggle itself, and so you're seeing people coming out going, well, I'm kind of Black too,
Right.
and how do you all feel about that? Like, is that should they be able to identify with their Blackness if they're not perceived as that, especially because of the climate? Or maybe maybe it's not because of the climate, but what do you think in general?
For some reason, when I think about what you asked, I don't know why, but like you said, like the identifying with the Black identity or identifying with the Black experience, my mind immediately jumped to, the Black Lives Matter moment when it was in its peak in 2020, where,
Yeah.
there was a lot of outrage. And I remember how all the apps, like every app went to like some sort of a black kind of, I don't know, like when you tapped on the app, you knew it was like they were supporting Black Lives Matter. I'll never forget
Right.
the day when I went on an app and it undid its Black Lives Matter. Like, okay, we're done. Like it was like, yeah.
No.
I was looking for the app. I'm like, it was black. And then I look back and it's not black anymore. It's just the regular color that it always was. I'm just like, that's really funny. I'm like, so
So
when
they
it's like,
were black for a moment. They hopped
right,
on the bandwagon, right? For
right.
as
So I
long
think,
as it took them
yeah,
to not be ostracized by the community.
exactly. So that's why I just feel like, yes, people can denounce it, but people have the right to what question your intentions if that's the case. Like if I could look at that app one more time, I just feel like, why did you just kind of hop off? Like even the only app that I still see supporting Black Lives Matter is, I know people don't use it anymore, it's Tumblr. I still use Tumblr, but they still have Black Lives Matter as their number one top 10, and I feel like they pinned it there. Like they haven't moved it since like the beginning of 2020. Every other app I've seen nothing else. So it's just like, in relation to people identifying it as like, with the black experience, it's not really fair to people who suffer. And then when it's beneficial for you, when it's all cool and the culture is cute and you got the braids and the box braids and the grilled
Hmm.
teeth and everything about hip hop music, that's when you want to hop on. And it's not really fair. It's like, you're either with us through it all or you're not.
So I would say for a long time I was very oblivious to all of this. So I would definitely have been the person that's like, why not let them wear the box braids? I mean, like it would have been like, oh my gosh, this is really is too politically correct at one point because I didn't. I believe I lived in a bubble for most of my time, and so what that means is that I um, even in the midst of this world, sort of like saw everybody as, having this sort of equal opportunity and not liking conflict and not wanting to introduce conflict. I'm like, well, if I could do it, they should be able to do it. And as I learn more myself about history, Caribbean history, American history, world history, it really does become more and more apparent to me why these distinctions are made, why there's terms such as cultural appropriation, why it's necessary to adhere it because of the history of appropriating culture. And so, but I think for many people, many young people that are out there now, nobody's teaching this in schools, so it sort of feels like why struggle. Sometimes it feels like to the I think prior to the Black Lives Movement and prior to this pandemic, you weren't getting it in your living rooms, it wasn't coming to you, so it sort of seemed like a fight that was already over, not realizing that it has been and percolating under the surface this entire time.
Yeah, I want to agree. I think something that's interesting too, it's like when you say that it's been there this entire time, it's something that I didn't even notice that was happening, especially because I went to a Catholic high school and it was very, very segregated. We had exactly like one table. I would say, okay, so we had a huge lunchroom and maybe like one or two tables, and both of the tables had just one group of black kids,
Mm.
and that was just it. And they called it Black Nation. It was so derogatory in every sense of the way, but it was just like we just kind of just went with it because it was our identifier. It was how we knew we had a community, I guess, at that point, and it just we also didn't have an option either because they were going to call us that even if we wanted it or not. And no matter how many students decided to fuss about it or anything of the sort, it was going to be that. And it was we also knew it was us against them at some point in time, because if something were to happen, if somebody, let's say, were to get upset about something and like retaliate, we would be seen as the aggregators and like the ones who were being the aggressors and not the ones who were um
Aggressed.
being aggressed. Exactly, being aggressed. And so it was just an interesting thing for me to see that like kind of kind of blow up in 2015 and then again in 2020 and just multiple times, to the point where I just kind of had this fatigue where it's just like I don't even want to say anything anymore at this point because it's been happening. And no one's been aware of it. And it's interesting because when I was in school and I saw it, I was very aware that a lot of these kids were in a bubble in their world, and they were being told things about us that were not true. And they would walk up to school. And I remember this one kid used to be like, he used to walk up to me and be like, so I hear you hear like gunshots outside of your house every day. What's that like? And I was like, gunshots? What? What? Like, I hear birds. I don't know. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Those gun-toting birds outside your
Gun-toting
window to get
birds,
into
right?
bed.
Yeah. Oh. And it's just like, these ridiculous stereotypes that they just would come up with and just kind of like say and like repeat. And like even professors would walk up and be like, yo, what's up, sis? How you doing? And I'd be like, what? I did not talk to you this way. I don't know why you're talking this way. And like it would, you know what I mean? And you just kind of go along with it because that's just how I had to identify at that point, because you had no other way to identify. And it was even more confusing, especially if you were a Caribbean American in the school. And, we had other girls who were from like Trinidad and who were from Guyana, and they did not necessarily, they looked like, they looked more so the quote unquote, like typical Indian look aesthetic, if that makes sense. And but they identified as being Black. And so for them, it was also kind of confusing because they sat with us and they were experiencing it all as well, but they were also being asked by other girls, like, so if your hair is like straight, then why do you sit with them? Like, what? Like, just like ridiculous questions. I mean, when I tell you ridiculous, it's to the point where it just kind of numbs me now. But it just is interesting to me that there is still so many. I mean, I can't say that it's interesting. It is interesting that there are African Americans who have not experienced it, because to me it feels like it's everywhere, but that's because I was put into a very concentrated group of people who were very highly biased. But if I were to be put in, I guess, another school, maybe like another area in Brooklyn where that was more Black than it was white, maybe I would have noticed a different kind of dynamic. But I just thought it was very interesting that for a lot of African Americans, they were very much shocked by it. They were just like, what is happening? Like, what is this? And I was just like, this is life in America, at least. And yeah, take me back to Haiti, I guess. I don't know.
You're speaking, and the closest, because that's, I don't have a frame of reference for that, like growing up. And the closest thing I'm thinking of is Mean Girls. And for me, that's TV, right? You never think that in this day and age that people are living those lives where there's that sort of segregation happening within the school system. I think for a very long time, I really thought that the worst was behind us and we were well on our way moving forward. And now, now you kind of see that we have so much further to go. I'd like to make a note that we're doing this podcast on the day that Georgia has just won, and so there is a lot happening around the country. Well, a lot happening right now in general, and so I think these discussions are very timely in that way. All right, final question for the group. With all of these protests, like Black Lives Matter protests, and with everybody's eyes now firmly on the idea of the inequality and the inequity that exists between uh, the white culture and all other cultures, particularly the Black culture, where would you like to see the Black community go in the coming year? Like, what would look like progress to you in a year from now or 5 years from now, from where we are today?
I guess I can start, and I would say freedom, and I don't mean that in the sense of being released from any sort of slavery or modern day slavery, like as some people would like to call it. But I mean that in a sense of like freedom, free of mind, and free of trauma. Of course, that's being free of trauma is not necessarily the easiest, and may not even be possible. But I guess unloading some of the baggage. And with that, I would hope to see a future where people are accepting of one another and and Black people being allowed to express themselves and be free and be open as possible and be able to identify themselves as others and do things that are not quote unquote Black. Like I guess for me, an example would be like me not growing up watching Boys in the Hood because that wasn't a culture in our household, and that me, that being a thing where it's like, oh, you're not Black enough because you didn't watch that. That that not being a topic anymore. That just being okay. Well, that it doesn't make me a Black person. It just makes it your favorite movie. I guess I don't know, but you know,
Yeah.
being able to just remove ourselves from these like stigmas and these stereotypes and just being free of that and letting go of the hurt so that we are not hurting each other anymore in this way and not hurting each other in the sense of, having these colorism issues and these uh, demographic and class issues anymore. None of these things. I just would like to see us just be, and that's that, and allow us to be together.
Um, so yeah, I from the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, so this movement put the light on what's really going on in the world right now, and I mean, I think I hope that people open their eyes on what's going on, because I think that a lot of people thought that racism was over, like in the 19th centuries, but with all going on right now, like we can obviously see that this is not over, and we are with a generation that want to speak out about those issues. So I hope that Black people will go first on a healing process, uh, because it's also put on the light the trauma that we have. So I hope that we can first go on this healing process, and then that everybody can just live together and open their mind and be tolerant between each other. I mean, this is my hope for the Black community, that I don't want all the communities to be like more separated by this movement, but I also want that we all understand each other and we can like move forward together for a better world. It might seem like utopic, but this is what I hope. And but I'm also think that everything is like a cycle. Like racism was something really used like in the past. Then there was like how to say, a blind period that okay, does not exist anymore, and now it's coming back. But yeah, I believe that like in years that gonna go down again, and that will come back again like a few decades after.
Yeah.
Everything is sitting, and I believe that that depends of the generation we are. Because for example, my parents' generation, they go quiet about it, about racism and all the injustice they live, because they just wanted to have a better life for their children. And now that we are those children that have that better life, so we are talking, so we believe that we have the right and the law for us to speak about it. So yeah, I'm also believe that this is a cycle, and so unfortunately that will not go away. But yeah, I hope like next generation will be also bold to raise their voice about it.
I think community, as the Black community can do, by taking that frustration and anger and sadness that that things are so stacked against us and that the odds are never on our side. Like we could take that and just say, you know what, actually, I'm gonna do it anyway, and I'm gonna do it better. Like for me, I look at the past people who can never, I mean, who struggled with, making films and getting in the industry. And, of course that hurts. Like, of course I realize, like, I can't ignore that, it hurts that I can't just, be as on level as, my fellow counterparts. But I don't just take it and just sulk. I just be like, I just take that pain and go, all right, let's see how I cannot make it, I can make it better for not only myself, but my children, my children's children, and for generations to come. So I would love to see the Black community break this generational cycle of pain and trauma and just really just channel it into winning, because I know that we were born and destined to be winners. So let's walk in it.
Wow, that sounds like a word right there. That sounds like a testimony. Thank you, Diana.
No problem.
So where I would like to see the Black community in the future? Scales removed, eyes wide open. That's it.
Say that again. You said scales removed,
Eyes wide open.
eyes wide open. Wow. Wow. Yeah, so I feel really, really lucky to engage in these conversations with all of you today. I really do. This is our inaugural podcast on In the Pursuit of, and this season we're covering In the Pursuit of Blackness. And to really, for a long while, I've had so many questions concerning how people live in general, and even more so how now more so than ever how Black people live across the globe, how what their lived experiences are, because I'm realizing that the world that I have grown up in is very different to the world that many other people have grown up in. And I really am excited and I feel honored to be able to explore the nuances of it, so we really get to understand each other on a level that goes beyond a superficial understanding of color, of race, or of ethnicity. So thank you all for joining us today. In the coming months, we're going to continue exploring this conversation with many different guests, and the theme of Blackness will take a lot of different twists and turns as we reach out across the globe to continue this exploration. So make sure to chime in. Make sure to follow us on Moss Playhouse, on our IG handles. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. You can find us at any of those platforms, and be sure to join us on Spotify for our regular podcasts. So thank you once again. We look forward for you all joining us on this journey to find what Blackness means to many of us. So until then, have a great day. I'll see you all soon. Bye. This podcast has been powered by Moss Playhouse, a theater and film company dedicated to increasing the lexicon of Black plays and films emanating from the Caribbean and its diaspora throughout the globe. Thank you for your support in growing this podcast community. Don't forget to hit the like button and follow us on IG, Facebook, and Twitter at Moss Playhouse for details on upcoming podcasts and content surrounding the Caribbean and its diaspora.